I'm well known as DJ Smart. I'm a geopolitical analyst from Tanzania, from SNS, a very big private online and influential media in Tanzania. Before I go into my question, this is my second Afro-Med, and it has been a game changer for me, from whatever I've learned from here. Let me ask you, after introduce yourself, the importance of educating journalists, giving them the tools in order to ask the right question and be able to analyze whatever is going on in the country. What do you think of that after introducing yourself?
Thank you. So my name is Jason Braganza. I'm the Executive Director at the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development, AFRODET. A very good question. The role of journalists is multiple. On the first instance, the tools that we hope you're developing and getting from AfroMedi will first and foremost help enrich the stories that you're writing in terms of the analysis, but also in terms of contextualizing what is currently happening in our countries and on the continent as a whole as it pertains to debt and development finance. Number two, journalists and the media serve as a bridge between citizens and the state. You guys have the ability to ask very difficult questions to the state in some countries. No, in all countries. Maybe it's a matter of perspective of how the questions are perceived.
Very true, yes.
But at the same time, you have a very creative way of translating those complex questions into stories that the general citizenry can appreciate and understand. And the third thing is the ability to go in depth and beyond the headlines, especially today, when there is a lot of clickbait around. People are monetizing clicks rather than depth. And it's very important for the Fourth Estate to maintain that integrity. And that's what AfroMedi tries to do with the tools that we provide. So it's not just about the technical jargon that we're trying to debunk on issues of debt, but also where can you get the information? Government websites, websites for international organizations and institutions, research pieces that are being done by your fellow journalists, but by think tanks, civil society organizations, and so on. So it's a very key role that the tools you develop and that we impart in exchange during AfroMedi help to play and facilitate that role of journalists.
And I can attest to that. One of my best articles that I did was when I came from AfroMedi 4, Ivory Coast. And I did, because what I usually do is try to get to empower our viewers and listeners in order to understand things that the way they are supposed to be, not the way they are presented to us. And you mentioned, you just said something very important, which is it's also about how a journalist presents their questions. They're not respectful sometimes. You know, it's all about respect sometimes on how you present your question to the government officials. By the way, the presentation that you did there is a gold mine. There's a lot of things. I want to know the implication of credit ratings or those agencies that, which apparently there's only 4 from what I understood, and all of them are from US. What does that mean, and what are the implications? And is there alternatives?
Yeah, sure. So credit rating agencies, in the simplest way, what they try to do is assess risk and put a price on it. Okay, so if you think of yourself as at an individual level, if you're going to borrow money from a bank, the bank would ask you, do you have a job? What kind of job do you have? What is your salary? How many bills do you have to pay? And when you give them all that information, they will tell you, DJ Smo, we can only give you $1,000. That means they've taken all the information you've given them. They've said, this guy has a medium risk, he can pay, but this is how much we can lend him. That's what credit rating agencies do, but at a national scale. Now, the challenge we currently have with the existing credit rating agencies is all of them are Western dominated, okay, largely headquartered in the US, and have very little understanding about the historical, political, social, and economic context of Africa in terms of the role of colonialism, the role of the extractive economy, the role of still being a continent that is exporting primary raw commodity. And when the way they use their methodology to price and assess risk is based on certain biases because of the way, because of the omissions in their understanding of the context in our continent. So what tends to happen with credit rating agencies in the situation when it comes to Africa is that they price the risk much higher than, let's say, they would in Asia or Latin America. So the cost of borrowing for a sovereign state in Africa is about between 5 and 7% more expensive for the same loan if a country in Latin America or Asia were going to take
the usual percentage in those countries, roughly?
So if we take, for example, the Eurobonds that many of African governments borrowed last year, Kenya borrowed at approximately 13%, the most expensive one on the continent. Cote d'Ivoire borrowed at, I think, between 7 and 9%. The same Eurobond in Asia would be around 5 or 6%. In Latin America, the same. It's almost twice. So these are the issues that we have with credit rating agencies. And the second issue we have with credit rating agencies is that when a country cannot pay or afford to pay, they do what we call a downgrade. Okay, so they downgrade you, and when that happens, the price of borrowing now goes up again. So it's already expensive, but it becomes even more expensive in terms of countries being able to borrow. Are there alternatives? Yes, there are. The African Union Commission last year launched a process to establish its own African credit rating agency. It's being led and coordinated by the Africa Peer Review Mechanism, and there are a couple of other international organizations like the UNDP and AfriCatalysts that are also working with the Africa Peer Review Mechanism to try and establish this African credit rating agency. And hopefully it will serve as an alternative to the existing ones and be more contextually aware of the economic and political, social dimensions and structure of the continent when it's pricing risk when it comes to debt.
I'm just trying it's going through my mind. For organizations which are as sophisticated as they are, is it that they decide, or they just don't want to acknowledge our history and our colonization, or is it simply I don't want, it's difficult for me to believe that they don't know at all, or is it simply because that it's market, it's capitalism, as you say, the market is all about getting benefit to the shareholders. So is it that they don't know that, or?
I think it's a combination of the two. I feel that capitalism ignores these historical factors conveniently because, you know, it makes then the analysis very complicated in terms of how do you maximize profit. Okay, and also there is this assumption with capitalism that you can overcome that with just changing a few things. So, for example, change your leadership, so have democracy, or borrow some more and invest in certain places. But what it forgets is that when you have a governance structure globally that is still very much based in a colonial setup, which is extraction, you cannot develop. It's impossible, right? When you have weak states and weak governance systems, you cannot develop because some of the ills in that system are perpetuated by the capitalistic society and by the capitalistic system. You know, so there's also a vested interest by these credit rating agencies to ignore some of those historical facts and perpetuate this idea of profit maximization in that sense.
I don't know if you might have come across Professor Howard's. He had a lecture where he was saying Africans are meant to be producers. As we're not supposed to develop, that's how the global structure is. So either bananas or either coffee, and we sell it to them and they add value and it comes back to us. It begs another question, which is we borrow mainly through US dollars. And there is, apart from the high interest rates, there is the fluctuation of the exchange rates. And for example, current has the worst in the world exchange rate against the dollar, which means apart from the high interest rates that we have to pay we might be paying, let's say, within a time frame of 10 years or 20. It means the higher the dollar is, or the stronger the dollar is, the much we have to pay. How does, now we're talking to a layman for them to understand, how does that affect a bus driver or a lady who's selling vegetables? And is there any instance of any country who has been able to borrow on their local currency?
So that's it's a very complicated question. I'll try my very best to simplify. So I think and I mentioned that in my presentation, one of the biggest challenges we have in the creditor system is the dollar dominated debt. So there's something called US dollar hegemony, because it's an international currency of reserve, it's a trusted currency, and most transactions internationally are done using US dollars. Now, how does this affect citizens in the context of debt, high interest rates, and exchange rate fluctuations? Well, number one is inflation, right? So cost of living. I'll use the example of Zambia and Ethiopia. In Zambia, when they entered their debt restructuring, the value of the Zambian kwacha plummeted. It dropped, and
after the restructuring.
When they defaulted and entered, and what ended up happening is that the value became so low that the government had to, on a daily basis, announce how much it would cost to buy a kilo of maize meal, so the flour for making food, how much it would cost to buy a liter of cooking oil, a kilogram of sugar, and so on and so forth. Because just over the last 3 years, right? So one of the biggest impact of dollar-denominated debt when you have high or very volatile exchange rates for citizens is the inflationary aspect. So the cost of living becomes a lot more expensive. Number two is that even then when you're trading, so from a government point of view, when you're trading, the value of your currency is very weak. So what you try to do is exchange it for dollars in order to be able to borrow from international markets. So it's a huge problem. Have there been instances where countries borrow in local currency? So countries borrow both from outside, so foreign debt, but also borrow domestically. So the domestic debt is in local currency. Now there is a move that is emerging and developing in the discussions around foreign borrowing, where the lending can be done in local currency. So for example, international institutions like the World Bank, there's a lot of advocacy that's being done by some governments, a lot of civil society, and some academics saying, if you're going to finance a project in Tanzania or in Kenya, why don't you not use the shilling? So, compute whatever you're going to compute in dollars, convert it at a particular fixed exchange rate, and say this is the equivalent in Kenya shillings, and transfer. So that way you eliminate the interest rate fluctuation, so the interest rate fluctuation as well as the exchange rate volatility that a country like Kenya might face every so often. So there are those conversations going on. There's also been, an idea to sort of de-dollarize, right? So move away from the dollar and pick up other, global currencies like the Chinese renminbi as well. But whilst that might sound nice politically, I think you've got to be careful that you do not replace one strong currency with another strong currency that has the same type of that will have the same type of risks or carry the same type of risks, right? So I think the best thing is to try and find ways in doing local currency lending and local currency borrowing. One other way is also to develop your domestic capital markets if you want to borrow. A country like Ethiopia, for instance, when they built their Great Renaissance Dam just a few years ago, that dam was built using debt, but not foreign debt. It was financed fully from Ethiopians. The government came up with something called, it's like a citizen bond. Yeah, and the way the government marketed it was to say that this is a national pride project. And a lot of citizens put money into that government bond, and they financed the Renaissance Dam. So that's another way of doing it, where you have big infrastructure projects, whether they are roads, electricity, water, health, whatever you want to call it, but make it feel like it's part of the national pride, and build that citizen buy-in and encouragement for them to invest in those kinds of national projects. It's just one example as an alternative to some of these things, and if you do it correctly, you know, there's a way in which citizens can engage. Yeah.
Do you know if of any country who has borrowed external by local currency instead of USD?
No, I'm not aware of any that has done that.
There's something which is you mentioned, which is debt servicing to tax revenue ratio.
Yes.
Yeah. From the countries that, from the region that I'm coming from, now that you hear they announce we've taken a loan from IMF or World Bank or any other, and some of them they don't even announce it because I think it goes under audacious debt. Yes. And the next morning there are new tariffs and due debts. And can you just explain that?
Yeah, so I mean the debt service to tax revenue ratio is an important one, because if you think about it, a lot of money that the government collects is through taxation. Okay, a majority of it is through taxation. So in a country like mine in Kenya, where at the moment, for every 100 shillings that is collected in tax revenue, the government is paying between 67 and 71 of those shillings to debt. Yeah?
67 to 71.
Shillings. So that means, so for every 100 shillings, about 70, let's say 70, is going to debt servicing. That means it leaves 30 shillings for the government to run government, so that means pay salaries and all of those things, and to do its development work. So build hospitals, build schools, build roads, and so on. It's not sustainable. And this ratio is very important, because what the government then is forced to do is introduce these taxes that you're describing. Now, in my country, in Kenya, the public said no.
Yes.
Last year, we had the Maandamano protests. Similar things happened in Uganda, in Nigeria as well. So we have to be very conscious of this ratio, because this is the one that has the direct impact on citizens. The debt to GDP ratio is okay for the Ministry of Finance, because it tells the Ministry of Finance you can borrow more or less. The issue of public consultation in terms of government borrowing, in most countries on the continent, there are laws that says there has to be public consultation. At Afrodad, we have a document called the African Borrowing Charter, where one of the principles on responsible borrowing is for government to do public consultation. So in the same way, it will put out the budget and say, give us your comments. We want to hear about the budget. They will say, we intend to borrow from this lender, this is the interest rate, this is the purpose of the loan. They should do that. Or the parliament should be aware that the government is borrowing, because every government has what they call a medium-term expenditure framework, a medium-term debt strategy, and a medium-term budget plan. In all of that, it tells you how the government intends to raise money to fund its development and its operations. Part of it will be taxation, part of it will be debt. And where there is debt, it needs to say, we're going to borrow from these creditors for these many years at this interest rate. If they don't do that, there are laws that are being broken. Right?
Yeah.
And against the constitution, against the public financial management, and so on. And this is where you start having issues around whether the debt is legitimate or illegitimate, right from the context of borrowing. Yeah.
And we did.
I'm being told your time is almost running up.
To tell the interviewer, not him.
So you raised the issue of payment, which. On SNS, we did a comprehensive coverage throughout the Maandamano and everything. So, do you think, and it was due to a high taxation, and the government, after the public said no, do you think they've done what they're supposed to do, and do you think it was effective?
I think it was effective for three reasons. Number one is that it showed that at a moment in time that the public had had enough of the very regressive tax policies that the government was introducing. It was also effective in the sense that it exposed just how bad the debt situation actually is in Kenya. For a very long time, the public was not in the know, or even journalists would ignore the issue of debt. Yes, they would announce the government has borrowed X billion of shillings since the last regime, but there was no in-depth analysis of what that actually meant. And I think Maandamano forced us to understand the debt situation in the country and how that related to the high taxation that was being proposed. The government has made changes. Of course, it has snuck in a few things, but on the whole, I think some of the recommendations that were being made by the public and by civil society organizations and other experts, they've tried to integrate them as much as possible. We'll see. We're now in that next cycle. The government is currently developing the new PFM bill. So we the finance bill. So we'll see where that is. Yeah.
My last question is, obviously we need another session tomorrow or the next day. So there's this, when it comes to dollar, do you think it's healthy using dollar internally? Let's say, for example, people are going to pay for hotels by US dollar, or they're going to buy certain things in a country which they have their own local currency. Do you think that is...
It's not good. It's not good because it shows that the business sector is not confident in the economic situation of a particular country, and they're not confident in holding local currency. In fact, if you look at a good example, again, some countries, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, I mentioned Zambia, when they go through these heavy, even Ghana, these heavy debt cycles, the value of the local currency becomes very volatile. So people get afraid of holding local currency and decide to hold the hard dollar. So when you start seeing that in the economy, even as you're saying for basic things, then you should get worried that things are not all well, that people don't want to hold local currency.
Thank you for the session one.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, I appreciate it. Yes.
Ila mwana Fuse ili upate content zote za Fuse kiwepesi. Fuse Military, Fuse X-Files, Fuse Adventure, Fuse Tech, Fuse Ndinga, Fuse Afya na zinginezo. Kuzipata kwa wepesi, jiunge kwenye Fuse WhatsApp channel. WhatsApp channel ni tofauti na WhatsApp group. Hii ni WhatsApp channel. Utapata direct link ya video zote pala zinapotoka. Moja ya njia ambayo unaweza kujiunga ni kuscan hii hapa QR code, au tuma ujumbe wa WhatsApp kwenye namba hii hapa, utapata link ya kujiunga kwenye WhatsApp channel. Ila pia nitakuwa naweka link kwenye comment section.
It's your techie DJ Smart 255 hapa SNS. Unaweza follow on my Instagram DJ Smart 255, YouTube channel DJ SMA 255, Threads DJ Smart 255, Snapchat DJ Smart 255, TikTok DJ Smart 255. Account name yapo, lakini vile vile unaweza ukatoa simu yako ukascan hiyo ikakupeleka moja kwa moja huko. Ninakuwa na posti vitu ambavyo ni fun, clip kwa ufupi ambazo mada ambazo nazitoa, mambo yangu ya mapishi na pochopocho za hapa na pale. TikTok DJ Smart 255.
DJ Smart. Easy.